Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. The biggest story today is a growing diplomatic fight between Washington and Beijing over the detention of American scientist Youlin Chen, a case that sits right at the intersection of espionage, nuclear security, and the increasingly complicated relationship between scientific cooperation and national security. Chen is a U.S. citizen and seismologist who was detained by Chinese authorities in November 2024 while preparing to leave Beijing after visiting family. His case only recently became public after his family and supporters decided to push for greater attention, saying quiet diplomacy had not produced his release. Chen's work focused on something that sounds incredibly technical but is strategically important: using seismic data to identify underground nuclear explosions. His research included analyzing North Korea's nuclear tests, including data collected from monitoring stations in China. The science behind this is essentially trying to determine whether a seismic event is a natural earthquake or evidence of a nuclear detonation. That expertise has become extremely sensitive in an era where nuclear competition is returning to the center of great power rivalry. Chinese authorities accuse Chen of espionage. His supporters strongly reject that accusation, arguing that his work was transparent, collaborative, and based on publicly available research. His wife has said Chinese investigators questioned him more than 100 times about his expertise, and advocacy groups say he has lost between 30 and 40 pounds during his detention and has struggled to access medication for chronic health conditions. The U.S. government has now elevated the issue. Secretary of State Marco Rubio designated Chen as wrongfully detained in March, and President Trump raised the case directly with Xi Jinping during their May meeting in Beijing. The challenge for Beijing is that cases like this increasingly affect more than one individual. They influence whether American researchers, business leaders, and academics feel comfortable operating in China. The broader question is whether scientific engagement can continue when areas that were once considered normal research are increasingly viewed through a national security lens. And that concern extends beyond Chen. Chinese authorities also recently detained another U.S.-linked researcher, Myanmar expert Min Zin, on espionage allegations. The message coming from Beijing is consistent with the direction Xi Jinping has taken China over the past decade. National security comes first, and the state has broad authority to investigate perceived threats. Now, shifting from individual cases to the broader strategic competition, the U.S. is adjusting how it responds to China's growing maritime pressure. Several U.S. Coast Guard cutters that had previously operated in the Middle East are now moving into the Western Pacific, operating from locations including Singapore and the Philippines. This is part of a broader effort to challenge China's gray zone tactics, and this is where the Coast Guard's role becomes interesting. The competition with China is not just about aircraft carriers and submarines. A lot of the pressure happens in the space below military conflict, where China uses Coast Guard ships, maritime militia, and civilian vessels to reinforce its territorial claims. Beijing has become very effective at operating in that gray area. It can create pressure while avoiding the kind of actions that would trigger a traditional military response. The U.S. Coast Guard provides another option. It allows Washington to maintain presence, support partners, and challenge coercive behavior without immediately escalating every encounter into a naval confrontation. Taiwan is also preparing for this new security environment. Taiwan's joint defense exercises are underway this week, focused on whether the island can maintain government operations and military effectiveness during a crisis. The emphasis is on resilience, not just combat power. One drill moved armored vehicles through Taipei near key government facilities to test rapid deployment and protection of critical infrastructure. Another involved artillery units operating from a civilian maintenance facility, using concealment techniques and decentralized command structures. The larger message is that Taiwan is trying to make itself harder to disrupt. The goal is ensuring that even if communications are damaged or command structures are targeted, military units and government institutions can continue operating. Meanwhile, China's economic picture remains complicated. Beijing reported second quarter economic growth of 4.3%, down from 5% in the first quarter and below its annual target range. The slowdown reflects familiar problems: weak consumer confidence, a struggling property market, and uneven domestic demand. But China's export engine remains powerful. June exports jumped 27% compared with the previous year, driven partly by demand for semiconductors used in artificial intelligence infrastructure and continued strength in electric vehicles. Chinese companies exported more than 1 million vehicles in a single month for the first time. That creates a difficult balancing act for Beijing. China remains highly competitive in advanced manufacturing, technology, and industrial production. But the domestic economy is still struggling to convince households to spend more and businesses to invest more aggressively. The AI boom has provided a major boost, but it does not erase the underlying challenges in the property sector and consumer economy. China is also continuing to signal that its military capabilities are expanding. Beijing highlighted a July 6th submarine-launched ballistic missile test, describing it as a demonstration of its growing sea-based nuclear deterrent. Chinese military analysts said the missile was likely part of the Youlin family and could have a range exceeding 8,000 kilometers. The announcement was clearly designed to send a message. China wants its nuclear forces viewed as increasingly survivable and capable of deterring major adversaries. That message comes alongside continued military cooperation with Russia. Chinese and Russian naval forces recently completed the Joint Sea 2026 exercise in the Yellow Sea before beginning joint patrols. The drills included anti-submarine warfare, air defense, and search and rescue operations. The significance is not that China and Russia suddenly have a NATO-style alliance. They do not. The important point is that this cooperation is becoming routine. Repeated exercises create familiarity between militaries, improve communication, and demonstrate that Beijing and Moscow are comfortable showing strategic alignment. Beyond military issues, China continues its diplomatic push abroad. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Solomon Islands officials and emphasized continued cooperation in infrastructure, education, healthcare, and renewable energy. The Pacific Islands remain a major area of competition because Beijing views economic engagement as a way to expand influence, while the U.S. and its partners are increasingly focused on ensuring China does not gain excessive strategic leverage in the region. And finally, Lithuania is attempting to repair its relationship with Beijing after years of tension over Taiwan. New Lithuanian Prime Minister Mindaugas Sinkevičius described the country's 2021 decision to allow a Taiwanese representative office using the name Taiwan as maybe too brave. China responded at the time by downgrading relations and restricting trade. Lithuania is now seeking normalization with Beijing while maintaining its defense commitments, including continued support for Ukraine and a U.S. military presence. You've reached the end of today's intelligence download. If you enjoyed it, a review or comment helps the show find the right people. For more Russia, China, Iran, the Middle East, and DPRK coverage, visit restrictedhandling.substack.com. Until next time.